Hello, welcome to Casa de Tre Oci here in Venice, where the philosopher Katarina Kolozova is about to give a lecture on value in Marx and the Techno-Capitalist Fallacy. What does she mean by these things? Why are they important today? Let's find out.
I believe that it's wrong to conclude that we are beyond neoliberal global capitalism and that we're strangely entering retrogradely moving backwards into some form of feudalism. It's also I don't know, it goes against the laws of interpretation I adhere to, which are those of historical materialism, which do not allow any backward movement, and I cannot conceive, so hence the fallacy. It cannot be a left-wing proposal if you propose that the movement is retrograde. Plus, there is absolutely no reason to call this metastatic version of capitalism, of global capitalism that we're witnessing nowadays, to call it feudalism of any sorts. It is simply capitalism at its worst, maybe at a certain point of pivotal crisis. I mean, there have been crises and crises. This may be a pivotal point. So the fallacy is there to claim that this advanced form of capitalism, which, by the way, requires authoritarianism. This is also one of the fallacies. If the presumption is if it's divorced from democracy, then it must be something else, some other form. It's not capitalism. And what is the immediate answer? Well, it's authoritarian. There is something monarchic about it. Therefore, we shall call it feudalism. So this is simply the error in reasoning there, and therefore the entire proposal that what we are witnessing nowadays is some form of feudalism, techno-feudalism, is a fallacy because of all of this logical fallacies or deficiencies in the argument. This is essentially the core of the talk today. The logic would be the following. So of the proposal I will make here, which will combine Marx, Laruelle, Karatani to a degree, and surprisingly, actually not surprisingly, because we're talking about Karatani, Saussure as well. So maybe we should first depart from the question of the radical dyad. So maybe I'm skipping here, but can I go ahead? Yeah, that's why I paused at the beginning. I think that we must depart from there in order to explain how we assign value. The method of the radical dyad, as Laruelle calls it, or he also calls it unilateral difference, or dualysis, with a dual, like analysis, but with dual as the first part of the composite noun. So this is an analysis which allows for the two we encounter, and he encounters initially in Lacan, the real and the thinking subject, the subject, but Laruelle uses a desubjectivized notion of thought, so just some sort of an activity. And he deliberately uses a vague term like thought, avoiding consciousness, knowledge. It's just an activity called thinking. So we have thought and we have the real. That is the object of thought. Thought seeks to explain the real. So what Laruelle argues there is the following. He, first of all, he admits the foreclosure of the real, just as Lacan does, as so many others of our post-Heideggerian era, or post-Wittgensteinian era, maybe. So he admits that. He admits the radical foreclosure. But similarly to Quentin Meillassoux, he sees the problem in this admission. He sees a problem in the admission as we see it in post-structuralism or postmodernism, as he would call it, and it's the following. You admit this radical foreclosure, but then you decide that you will assign every meaning, everything that makes sense to the universe of signifiers, of the signifying chain of language, you know, like the post-structuralists understood Lacan, and you just forget about the instance of the real. The real is not even something you should be thinking about. As Judith Butler would say, I can just laugh or cry, but there is nothing to say of the real. Well, Laruelle, Alenka Zupančič, so he's not the only. Meillassoux argue that we actually do talk, even Lacan himself, in some early writings, that we actually do talk about the real all the time. We actually mediate the effects of the real. So language is invented for that, for the purposes of this mediation. So if this is so, and Laruelle argues that it is so, what we need to admit is that this radical dyad, this irreconcilable dyad between thought, let's call it thought because it doesn't have to be human, right? Thought and the real remains a dyad. If you say, like, you know, the post-structuralist take of Lacanian, of Lacan, or some Lacanians, if you take this dyad as something, as the split to be separated, to be celebrated, like, oh, we had this absurd split. In the celebration of the split, of the absurdity of the split, you're already reconciling the irreconcilable dyad. He says there is no consolation. It's a dyad. And there is this alienation between thought and the real that cannot be changed in any way. It can be only affirmed. So I may be adding a little bit to what Laruelle says, or tweaking the words, his words, to lead us to the question that was asked. If you accept this proposal made by Laruelle, then you reach Marx. Then you reach Marx's treatment of the real, the material, the physical, and the thinking subject, but from a third-party perspective. So it's almost a non-subjective position, and utterly non-anthropocentric position. So this allows you to think from the position of whatever excarnate entity, sentient entity, whereby the difference between technology and animal doesn't matter anymore, which is, you know, something, a potential in Marxist thought that I think is rarely recognized. So if you apply the same logic to how human subjectivity is constituted, so we have the real, you know, whatever, it's the physicality primarily, the body, but it's not just the body, it's also the phenomenology of the body. You know, to a certain instance, there is something about us that precedes language, right? It's mainly concentrated in the body, revolves around the body, or our physicality, because this body can have all sorts of, you know, technological extensions, but it's still a materiality. And this is something that stops before language. And is a block to language. But it's also something that invites language, because you cannot live in this immediacy. You must mediate it, you know, you must, this experience must be mediated because we're social beings. We kind of, in order to constitute ourselves as subjects, we also need to mediate this immediacy via language to ourselves as well. So applying the logic of radical dyad in this sense would be this immediacy of the realness we are, and language, so not subjectivity, because subjectivity would be this soothing reification of the absence of unity. There is no unity. There is this real and the signifying automaton of language. At least we can agree on that, I believe, in our era, that language is the signifying automaton, be it natural, be it artificial. I don't make any difference. It's essentially the same. So it's against something that is, you know, not really quite us, the self, you know, the self is still decentered. So in the sense, so going back to the absence of unity and this originary alienation, it's very, it may seem like a detour, but it actually leads to the answer. It's very interesting that in Marx, we find this affirmation of alienation, and like he's there to reveal the truth of this fundamental alienation that we've been just talking about. And on the other hand, he keeps criticizing the reification of the absence, fetishization, money and monetary value as fetish, etc. Why is that? Because he would, this is my interpretation, he would affirm the original and founding alienation. Actually, this alienation invites the artifice of language, of our self-alienation into a language, into signification, into making sense. And so this is this explanation is at the level of language, and language serves to explain subjectivization. But what we do by assigning meaning to things, so creating language, is actually valorization constantly, creating value. So how the creation how the making sense or creation of signification, how the signifying automaton works, and how the creation of value, for example, in capitalism, as a system of an automaton in a way of signification. These are signs. These are this is a sort of a language that's being exchanged and kind of makes sense in and of itself as a sort of an automaton. So this type of value, that is monetary value, or value in the sense of making sense, for example, creating philosophy, it's essentially the same thing. So it happens on the plane there, of the automaton, and I'm not. I was surprised to find out that I'm not the first to discover this, because Karatani makes actually recognizes this same logic when he analyzes Saussure's interpretation of how language works and Marx's analysis of how value creation works. So I took the route of Laruelle and my own route, but actually they coincide perfectly with Karatani, and that's why I will combine them all today in the talk. No, just do it differently, like radically differently, because the non in front of philosophy means putting in brackets the self-sufficiency of philosophy. Yeah, principle of sufficiency, that's how Laruelle calls it. Or I think that Marx also invites us to sort of abandon kind of the same thing, like this circular narcissistic image of an idea and of a self-sufficient system. If you remember in his thesis on Feuerbach and in German ideology, he criticizes Feuerbach and his materialism for not being a true materialism because it's still too philosophical. It shouldn't be philosophy, it should be science of humans, about the species being of humanity. I think we still have to do philosophy, but we can learn something from Marx and Laruelle about this bracketing out of this smugness of philosophy, and learn a little bit from the humility that scientists have. A scientist is never bothered with the absolute truth and the unity of his thought and the real that he's analyzing. No, the real is out there. It's a certain thing that has a certain name, and they arrive to a degree that explains it to a certain degree in some aspects. Fine, this works. Moving on, someone else will fill the rest of the puzzle. So this idea of completeness and unity of thought and the real, this is the desire of philosophy. It has been since Parmenides and Plato, and scientists, they don't have it, and maybe we should learn a little bit from them in this in changing the posture of thought, as Laruelle would call it. So maybe that now, but not abandoning philosophy altogether. One of those people who are very optimistic about the future of Europe, unlike many people, maybe even people associated with the Institute, I don't know. I think that Europe does have a potential to reinvent the mode of production, to arrive at a completely different social contract, as Sam Altman would call it, but not his idea, social contract. Something close to what a Marxian eschatology would have been, or something that I would root for, which is participation of humanity no longer as wage laborers, but that too, if necessary, but not as the final definition of a human subject and a citizen. Who knows what the citizen will become without being a waged worker? That's another question. So, because all of this is so uncertain, I think that really the only solution is participation in the means of production, be it fixed capital, so literal, like machines, etc., participation in ownership of this, seizing the means of production, or participation in the finance capital, so some sort of, I don't know, participation in some sort of collective dividend, etc. But so this would be, in Marxian terms, fixed capital, I would call it. One is liquid, and the other is proper fixed capital, as Rosa Luxemburg would call it. It's just the machines, the factories, etc. So participation in ownership in that, and therefore through that in decision making. So I think in that way we are arriving at some sort of a communism without the naivete of the communism of the 20th century. The role of Europe is to be the center of this, because I don't see any other place. I mean, maybe China, but they have their own version, already ossified and well-established version of communism. This should be something completely new. Now, this may be, and it is probably a complete, dream on my part, but this is the direction I would go to. So. I think that I touched upon it when I said if we understand the process of subjectivization, so the process of subjectivization, or if we understand the non-human, as Orwell would call it. Actually, he wouldn't call it. John Omalarka would call it. That's his non-philosophical Orwellian take or version of post-humanism. So the constitution of the non-human, or the human understood non-philosophically, would follow the logic of the radical dyad. According to that logic, you would have, this irreconcilable alienation, but you're still there, you're stuck there in this body and in this immediacy of your realness. And all you have is this artifice of mediation to communicate, to survive, to just, you actually have to alienate yourself from yourself. I mean, that's life, that's even physics, like entropy. It must be that way. So the artifice of communication must occur, be it language, as in humans, or be it some other form of communication, as in animals. It may be also called language, but for the sake of some categorical distinction, let's call it a form of communication. So they also have this automaton of communication. They have a set of conventions how they communicate. So even in the constitution there is not much difference. That's why I said if we understand the non-human in this way, then the artifice of signification, creating signs, or value making, value comes into the conversation again, will render the difference between the machine and the animal obsolete, or irrelevant. But still there is something that the animals cannot share with the machines, but they can share with us, and we may find ourselves in that situation, to be dehumanized, to be reduced to bodily mass, to be exploited by this new form of capitalism. If we are rid of our agency as workers for wage, which kind of assures our status as citizen, these two things are linked together. Even in the past, when women didn't have the right to work, they still had to have some link with a patriarchal figure that had the status of a worker, even an unemployed worker, because this is a potential worker. So citizenship in modern state and being a worker for wage worker or labor are things that are linked. So if we lose in this rapid automation of labor, if we lose our status of wage laborers, workers, it becomes a huge question whether and why should we keep the status of citizens. I mean, why would anybody who owns capital allow us that? Because they also own state power. That's why I think that I know that others have had the similar proposals and arguments, but and the belief is that this could happen, this participation in finance capital or fixed capital could and should happen from the state, from top down. I don't believe that's doable. I think it must be bottom up. And this is where the question of the animals is relevant. We could be easily be dehumanized, as women were humanized after the Enlightenment. They were essentially treated like semi-humans or non-humans until then. So being a human is something that is philosophically assigned to you, value assigned to you. So you can easily use it. It depends on a philosophical decision, whether you keep it or not. If we all become obsolete, regardless of gender, as workers, we can easily all be dehumanized. We can all be literally reduced to the literal meaning of human resources. So we could become, just as the animals, bodies for capital use, in order to create value, because the material should always serve value creation. So this is the metaphysical contradiction at the heart of capitalism, essentially. So here we must understand that we kind of must establish some sort of solidarity with the animals, and the refusal of this ruthless exploitation and treatment of animals as mere resource should become maybe more understandable, more easily relatable, if we realize that we could easily find ourselves in this situation as well. I know it's very dystopian, but these are very dystopian times, so it may not sound so crazy, I hope.